Mold. What now? What next? I get calls all day long about people who have mold. Those people could be a business owner, could be a property owner, and it could be the resident who's living in a unit that has mold. And off the top of my head, what's coming to mind is a resident concern. He's calling me because he's spoken to the landlord several times, or she, and it seems like it's falling on deaf ears. Why doesn't this person take my complaint seriously? I have concerns. I've shared multiple times with him that I'm not feeling well, my mother's not feeling well, and I have this mold problem. So I try to get the person to back up a little bit and give me a little bit of the building history, a little bit of the occupant history, what's been going on in that environment to make you feel that you may have a mold concern, which you may have or you may not. The hardest mold job to deal with is the one that's right here, when they have a concern with mold that's not even real. But I have to figure that out. By asking questions, I can usually come to the conclusion that they most likely would benefit from sending me some pictures of the areas of concern or calling me in person for consultation, which at that point we're exchanging dollars. And a lot of people don't want to part with those dollars, but after they speak to me for a while, they get comfortable and understand why it would and should cost money to go out and do further investigation and discovery. Mold's a water damage really is what all mold is. All mold comes from moisture, and moisture is going to be excess moisture, whether it be in the form of a gas like relative humidity is moisture. There's condensation from moisture. Typically it's going to attract on cold surfaces. Cold surfaces attract dirt. Dirt is dust. About 70% of the air you breathe is dead skin. So there's always going to be mold food out there. And if mold can grow on a plate of glass, it can surely grow on the exterior wall of your home. In this case, a stucco exterior wall, no insulation, built in the 50s, and the wall's getting cold. It's condensating moisture, and that moisture is actually dripping down the wall. You can see it, or down the glass, especially a single pane, inexpensive apartment grade glass. It's going to be worse. If they upgrade the glass and they try to get with dual pane or 3 layers of glass that's going to give it more insulation, less chance of mold being on the window. But all windows leak. I wish I had good news for you, but the water damage business is never going anywhere because there's always going to be Mother Nature, there's always going to be wear and tear, and there's always going to be construction defect. But even a good window will leak somewhere at some time. Back to the moisture, it can often be from the person or resident living there not occupying the place properly in the sense of ventilation. They're not ventilating properly, they don't open their windows, they don't open up their shades, take long hot showers and don't have the exhaust fan on, or they don't let it run long enough after taking a shower. That moisture can accumulate in that room, and as I mentioned, on a cold surface with the vapor pressure coming through the wall, if their furniture is too close, like up against the wall can't breathe. So condensation develops on the surface of what's in front of the wall, and then mold starts to grow on their furniture. Or the bed's too close to the wall and the wall can't breathe, more mold. Most of that mold is surface mold. It can be washed off with some soap and water, maybe Dawn dishwashing liquid. The real problem is when the mold's on an interior wall. So exterior walls are most common to find mold growing, which is usually surface mold. But when you find mold on an interior wall, now I'm in my office here, this is an exterior wall. Most exterior walls have windows. An interior wall would be a wall on the inside, and the inside interior is to another room, not an exterior, not to the outside. When there's mold on those walls, you usually have a chronic moisture problem. So exterior walls could be landscape problems, could be sprinklers pounding against the building, or it could be drainage problems outside. Those are all true water intrusion, but most often it's none of those things. Even though the water is hitting the building, the moisture is coming from the resident who has a moldy condition, or we can call it a moldy client even. They're the source of their own mold problem, which again is surface and can be treated usually within a day, and you don't have to take the wall apart and spend thousands of dollars building or engineering a job to create negative pressure, which most indoor environmental professionals, IEP, is going to tell you when there's mold, when in doubt, tear it out. That's the mantra of an indoor environmental professional such as myself. However, it's expensive to open up walls to find no mold in them. You could do a wall cavity test. By sampling inside the wall cavity, you could drill a hole the size of a pencil right here, 1/4 inch diameter, drill the hole in the wall and extract air out of that wall. About 30-second sample, and we can tell you if you have mold in the wall analytically. So by analytically, I mean it's going to go to a lab, preferably a third-party accredited lab, and they're going to tell you what kind of mold you have. Now, if anybody's ever in your home and they're not one of two people, a mycologist or a microbiologist, they have no business telling you you have mold. Even after 30 years in the business, or 30 plus years, I don't tell people, yeah, that's mold. It appears to be suspect mold. Those are fudge words, because I don't know and I can't really say it is, because I would be laughed out in court if the judge was to ask me what my credentials were for identifying mold. I have none. I have real experience and I can tell you what is and isn't mold when I look at it, but I can't tell you it's mold until I get a test that comes from a lab, and when I write my report, based on the lab results, I'm able to tell the person what kind of mold. Now, in a residence, when you're living, doesn't really matter what kind of mold, whether it be friendly or foe. If it's mold, it's mold. And you'll see a lot of property managers and owners and people saying, well, I don't have any mold, I have a little bit of mildew. Well, okay, mildew is normal to have in a bathroom. Did you know that all mildew is mold? So you still have a mold problem. Not all mold is mildew, but all mildew is mold. I'll let you ponder on that for a minute. Essentially, any kind of mold in a residence shouldn't be there. In a bathroom, however, it's common to find surface mold because of condensation. And as long as you're keeping it clean and dry, which is not easy to do in a bathroom, that what people call mildew is acceptable as long as it's not creating a problem with their health. If that mildew, or in this case mold, is behind the tile or behind the grout or behind the caulking, it's because there's an inherent moisture problem, not from the atmosphere, but because of a broken water line or a leaky faucet or a shower head or the waste and overflow on the drain system's not functioning properly. That's where you have chronic moisture inside of a wall cavity, and that's when you need a true professional like myself to come out and actually do controlled removal or glorified demolition. The days of bashing and bagging and coming in with a wheelbarrow, those days are long over when you're dealing with indoor air quality and people's concerns, or they might be sensitive to dust. They could have a lot of pets, they could be smoking. There's lots of things that can create health concerns that give flu-like symptoms, but mold seems to get the big headline on all those issues when oftentimes it's not mold at all. It could be they just have an allergy to dust or they're immune compromised. Those are the people we really worry about. Maybe 3% of the population truly has concerns with mold, and it is the elderly, the young, and those who have been immune compromised because they've had some kind of illness or chronic problem with their health. Any kind of disturbance in the environment, even dust, can cause big problems for those people. So what do you do when you have mold? What now? What next? Identify it. Try to find out what kind of mold it is. Do I have to know what kind of mold it is? Absolutely not. The S520 mold standard, the IIC, that's the International Institute of Inspection, Cleaning and Restoration, in their mold standard, it states that if you know that there's mold or you assume that there's mold, then you don't really need to test for mold. What you need to do is spend your good hard-earned money towards remediating it, which means removing it. Now, if you can remove the mold professionally, then you might want to consider having a third-party indoor environmental professional come back on the back end and do what's called a PRV, a post-remediation verification, and they're going to tell you whether or not the person was successful by 3 ways. Visually, they're going to look to see if there's any dust by doing what's called a black glove test. You're familiar with the white glove test when you're cleaning a house? Well, they use a black glove looking for drywall dust and plaster and debris left behind from the controlled removal. When they do control removal, it should be, if the job's large enough, under a containment with negative pressure. Containment could be as simple as a 6 mil, 4 mil plastic erected up, putting a negative air machine or air filtration device, aka air scrubber, in the room, and you duct through some flex ducting or rigid ducting. You want to duct the air that's in the room out the window. So the machine's running, and it's sucking, and it's being filtered through a primary filter, a secondary filter, and then ultimately into a HEPA filter. HEPA is a high efficiency particulate arrest or particulate air that's 97.9 or 97%, can't remember exactly, but 99.97% effective at particle sizes of 0.3 micron. HEPA was developed out of the military needs through chemical warfare but the particle size 0.3 is important because it can get lodged into your lung, and that's the size particulate they're looking for. Most mold is typically much larger, about 5 micron in size, and that's what we're trying to remove when you're doing mold remediation from someone's indoor living environment, is by filtering and removing the contaminants. And to do that, you physically move the wall, dispose of the debris, and then when the wall's been exposed, or ceiling, floor, wherever it may be, you're cleaning through a detergent solution, and then you follow up with often a bactericide. Now, the bactericide isn't for mold, respectfully, it's actually for bacteria, which you get from non-clean water. Bacteria creates virus and things of that nature. Much worse than mold will ever be, but mold, again, seems to get all the conversation and all the hoopla around mold and how it could be affecting someone's health. But virus and bacteria are very real and should have the same amount of emphasis placed upon them. The benefit of getting something clean and dry is often the bacteria will die and kill itself out because it has to usually be wet and living. But don't fool yourself, it can still be dry and you can still get sick, but you typically have to have some kind of open wound or a sore, or be touching it and then touching your eye. With mold, it can be just as harmful dead and dry as a living mold. Now let me tell you why. Living mold, most often Stachybotrys, Stachy for short, is a mold that people call black mold. It has the name black killer mold. I'm not aware of it ever killing anybody, to be honest with you, but that's the worry that people get through the media. But that mold typically stays put. It's very slimy and sticky, and it stays attached to the medium it's growing on. It's only when it starts to dry or you start to disturb it that it gets airborne. And so if you're doing air sampling and you have what we call indicator molds, which are water damage molds that we normally look for, there's about 5 of them. If those indicator molds are present in the air, that's a good indication the person has a water damage problem. A lot of molds that are in the air naturally come from outside when the windows are open, but certain molds that aren't found often are water damage molds, and when they are, that's a reason for you to do further investigation, discovery, further testing, or, as I mentioned earlier, save your money. If you can see it, you probably have a problem. Stop the source of what caused the problem to be there, which is typically going to be moisture. You have to identify where the moisture is coming from, get rid of the source of moisture. Once the moisture is gone, you can safely remove the water damage materials that are wet or been previously wet or stained from a water incursion, water intrusion. And then once it's clean and dry, then you're okay to have the air sampled for any kind of indoor air quality concerns or indoor environmental concerns that you may have. Typically, a third party should be the one doing that work, because again, that's perceived as a conflict of interest. If the same company that you hired to tell you have mold tells you what a wonderful job they did in removing the mold, that's a red flag. Now, if they tell you that you should you should have 3 other people, and they refer you 3 other people, but you really want them for whatever reason, that same company could do the testing, as long as you're aware that it is considered or may be considered a conflict of interest. Typically, testing companies on the front end that do the testing tell you have a concern and then actually do the work. I'm okay with that. Our company does that often for people because we're the ones doing the initial investigation, and we have a much better idea what's going on than a third party telling you what's going on and then having it go to bid, which is why it's good to have a third party on the front end, but most people can't afford it. That's why the standard says not to bother. But if you have a health concern or a lawsuit going on and you want to know what the background level is of the mold before you start the job, that actually protects the contractor, because the contractor now has a baseline of what to achieve when he does his work. Was the mold already in that other room, or did he cause that mold to get in that room from work he did in a room adjacent to it? So that's the benefit of having a third-party environmental company out for pre-testing before doing the post-testing, which is after-work stuff. So keep in mind, testing is important, it has its place, but you don't need to test because you think you have mold, and you don't really need to know what kind of mold it is, as long as you know that it's not good and it shouldn't be there. Put your money towards removing the source of where the mold came from. And on the back end, if you choose to, you can do the PRV, the post-remediation verification. Now remember, someone that's interpreting that data should be educated and skilled in indoor environmental. Also, you could use an industrial hygienist. They have a degree. It's not necessarily in mold, however, but they have a 4-year degree, and a lot of people favor industrial hygienist. I would say you don't need to have an industrial hygienist. You need to have someone who's board certified through the American, it's ACAC. It's the American Council of Accredited Certification. They're a third party, board awarded certification as to, let's say, the IRCRC, where you can get certified in a few days, as long as you've got the work experience to back it up. That's not a true certification like a board awarded certification or one you'd get by having a degree from a university. And there are more people educating on higher levels of indoor air quality out there, but you have to look for them. Most people have just the basics. Even a home inspector could be a good option if they had a background in dealing with microbial concerns. Many do not, and they are out there testing. I tell you, save your money. If someone's going to do a test inside and a test outside for mold, you're wasting your money. There's just not enough analytical data there to support a false positive or false negative. We have a 4 sample minimum at our company because we feel that you should have 1 outdoor control sample in the beginning of your sampling protocol, and at the end of your sampling protocol, another outdoor sample, preferably in a different location and at a different time, because the environment outside is constantly changing. And at a minimum, the sample in the area of concern and an area of non-concern. There's your 4 minimum samples. However, that's the minimum. If you can afford to take more samples in more rooms, I would always recommend it. And if you would ask me, where should I sample? What do you think? I would tell you 3 samples in every single room. Why? Not because I said so, but because the Bioaerosols and Control Handbook, American Industrial Hygienists Association's handbook, Bioaerosols and Control Handbook state to take 3 samples in every room of concern. But you and me are not Bank of America, if you will, so it's very costly to do it that way. And as I mentioned, if you can do away from sampling, spend your money on the source, get rid of it, and focus on your samples in the back end, unless you have a health concern or a lawsuit going on, then you might want to consider sampling on the front end. So you have mold. What now? What next? You remove the mold, now you're ready to be putting it back together after someone's told you its environment's conducive to do so. What are they looking for? The moisture content should be about 16% or less. Anything above 20% moisture content is going to support mold growth, so 16% is a good number to get it below. Wood, for example, should be about 8 to 10% naturally. When it gets wet, it stays wet, and it takes a while to dry. So you need at least a 4-day minimum in most cases to get structural components dry enough to be at 16% or less, so they won't support mold growth. How do you know whether it's wet or not wet? You find an area of non-concern, that becomes your baseline, and you find out what the moisture content is there, compare it to the area of concern, and you want to get the area of concern, go back to equilibrium of what it is in the other part of the house that hasn't been damaged. So once it's clean and dry, which is the job of a mold remediator, it's that simple. Glorified demolition, like I said, but if it's done right, it's done through controlled removal, engineered so you're not creating dust, you're not spreading dust or contaminants throughout the house or the building. And so it's clean and dry, now you can put it back together. You've got a clean bill of health from an indoor environmental company, again, preferably a third-party company. And what that does is gives you what we call a SWAN account, sleep well at night. It gives you that warm, fuzzy feeling. It takes away that anxiety of whether or not the job was done right or not. It's good for resale value of your home. It's also good for the buyer, that they feel comfortable or confident that you had someone that knew what they were doing out there doing the work, as opposed to Tom, Dick, and Harry or the handyman, which you certainly don't want to have doing any kind of indoor environmental quality work for you. It's just a liability waiting to happen. So now you're there, ready to do the repair phase, put your building back together. Again, a licensed general contractor, highly recommend it. You get your money's worth, and they can save a lot of time and money and keep you from having to deal with a lot of different folks in your house. Unless you'd like to be a PM, that's a project manager, then you can take the project on yourself. You can get an owner-builder license from the city if you don't have a licensed contractor working under their license. And you can have your own subs come in under your license as well, or your permit that you pull from the city if you choose to do so. It's always best to have an environmental company or a contractor that has their own license, own insurance, and have them pull the permit for you because it's on them that their work's got to be done right, instead of you, the homeowner, with your insurance and homeowner's insurance, and don't have people out there that aren't insured it's really a liability waiting to happen for you as well.